An old man sat by the window every day at the same hour. The townspeople thought it was just a quiet habit, but that chair, that window, had been guarding a secret for years. Because this man was still waiting for the soldiers he had lost in the war. As his eyes drifted toward the horizon, his heart held on to a single hope. One day, they will return. And then, one day, an unexpected visitor knocked on his door. Every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock, the townspeople would see him. An elderly man, his back slightly bent with age, sat in the same wooden chair by the window of his modest home on the edge of town. His hands, lined with years of labor and sacrifice, rested on the armrests, and his gray eyes gazed outward with quiet patience. Some thought he was simply watching the street. Others assumed he liked the way the late sunlight painted the fields gold. But those who looked closely noticed something more. His gaze was never casual. It was searching, waiting, as if any moment he expected someone to appear. Beside him on the small table was always the same object, a worn photograph of young soldiers, their uniforms crisp, their faces full of life and laughter. The edges of the picture were frayed, the colors faded, but he kept it close, guarding it like a treasure. He had never told the townspeople why he sat there every day, why his eyes lingered on the horizon. But whispers spread. Maybe he's waiting for his family. Maybe it's an old friend. No, look at that photograph. He's waiting for soldiers. And though no one dared to ask, everyone knew one thing. There was a story in that chair, and it was one he carried in silence. Every morning, just as the church bells tolled 9, he pulled the same chair closer to the window. His movements were slow now, but deliberate, like a man keeping time with an invisible rhythm. Neighbors had grown used to the sight. The old veteran sitting alone, staring at the empty road that led out of town. Children whispered about him as they walked to school. Why does he just sit there? Mama says he's waiting for someone. And they were right. On the table beside him sat a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age, and a single dog tag resting on top. His soldiers, boys he had once commanded, had vanished decades ago in the chaos of war. No bodies, no graves, no closure. The chair by the window became his watchtower. Day after day, year after year, he waited. But what no one in the town knew was this: he never waited in vain. For in his heart, he believed the war had taken their voices, but not their promise. They had sworn to return, and he, in his silence, had sworn to keep waiting. One autumn evening, the wind carried the smell of burning leaves through the town. The veteran sat in his usual place, the chair by the window, but this time his hand trembled slightly as he held the dog tag. His eyes wandered between the fading sunlight outside and the cold piece of metal in his palm. In his mind, the silence broke. Voices faint but unmistakable drifted back from a battlefield long buried in memory. Hold the line, sir. We'll make it back, I promise. He closed his eyes, and for a brief moment, the road outside wasn't empty. He could almost see them young men in dusty uniforms, marching, smiling, alive. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. The veteran muttered softly under his breath, "You said you'd return." The neighbors passing by that night noticed a light in his window burning longer than usual. What they didn't know was that inside, the weight of decades pressed harder than ever. His waiting had become more than habit. It was his last duty. It was a rainy afternoon when the silence finally broke. The veteran sat in his chair as always, the steady patter of raindrops against the glass his only companion. His dog tag rested on the table, the folded letter beside it relics of promises long unfulfilled. Then came a sound he hadn't heard in years. A knock. Firm. Respectful. He froze. For a moment, he thought it was just the storm playing tricks on him. But the knock came again. Slowly, painfully, he rose from his chair, his knees aching with every step. He opened the door. On his porch stood a young man in uniform, his face wet with rain but his posture straight. In his hand, he held a small weathered box. "Sir," the young soldier said quietly, his voice steady but reverent, "this belongs to you." The veteran's eyes fell to the box. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, lay another set of dog tags, the very ones he had believed lost with his men. His breath caught. His heart raced. It wasn't the return he had dreamed of, but it was a message, a reminder that promises made in war echo across generations, waiting to be delivered. The veteran's hands trembled as he took the box from the young soldier. The wood was scratched, the corners worn, but it carried a weight far greater than its size. He set it gently on the table by the window, the same table where his dog tag and letter had rested for decades. With a deep breath, he opened it. Inside were dog tags, folded scraps of cloth, and a faded black and white photograph of man standing shoulder to shoulder his man. The sight struck him like lightning. Names he hadn't spoken in years now flooded his memory. Faces long lost to time suddenly stared back at him from the fragile photo. The young soldier stood silently, hat in hand, watching. "My grandfather served with you, sir," he said softly. "He told me if I ever found this, I should bring it to the one who waited." Tears welled in the veteran's eyes, sliding down his weathered face. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like he was waiting alone. His soldiers had finally returned, not in body, but in memory, in honor, in the relics carried across generations. He whispered their names one by one, his voice breaking. The house, once filled with silence, now carried the weight of their presence. And for the first time, the chair by the window no longer felt like a prison. It felt like homecoming. The veteran sat quietly, his fingers tracing the edges of the faded photograph as though trying to hold on to the ghosts of his past. The young soldier stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "My grandfather always said you were the reason he made it home," the young man said. "He told us you carry more than your own share, that you never stopped watching out for them. He called you the one who waited." The veteran swallowed hard, his voice a whisper. "I didn't save them all. I've carried that weight every day." The young soldier knelt beside him. Placing the cap, he held onto the table next to the box. "You carried them farther than anyone else could have, sir. And because of you, I'm here. My family is here. We'll remember them and you long after this chair is empty." For a moment, the silence returned, heavy and familiar. But this time, it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of legacy of promises made and kept across generations. The veteran reached out, his frail hand resting on the young man's shoulder. His eyes softened, and a faint smile touched his lips. Then the waiting was worth it. The room filled with golden light as if the past itself had finally found peace. Days turned into weeks, and the young soldier kept his promise. He returned often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but silence to share. Together, they sat by the window, one old, one young, both watching the street as if waiting for someone just beyond the horizon. The townspeople began to notice. Neighbors who once passed by without a glance now slowed their steps, tipping their hats, offering quiet nods. Some even brought small gifts, a pie left on the porch, a folded flag, a handwritten note that simply said thank you. The chair by the window was no longer just a place of waiting. It became a place of teaching, of remembering. Stories were never spoken outright, yet the silence carried them, deeper than words ever could. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in hues of fire and gold, the young soldier found the old man asleep in his chair. His hand still rested on the photograph, his face calm, his chest rising slowly. For the first time, the young man realized the veteran wasn't just waiting for the past anymore, he was at peace with it. The visitor whispered softly, almost like a vow, "I'll keep watch now, sir." And as the room filled with the quiet glow of sunset, the legacy of the chair by the window passed down from one guardian of memory to the next. The morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft stripes across the wooden floor. The chair by the window sat still, empty for the first time in decades. On the table beside it lay the photograph, the box of relics, and the veteran's cap, all arranged as if waiting to be remembered. The young soldier entered silently, his eyes drawn to the empty chair. He didn't speak, but he placed his own cap gently on the table, next to the old one. Then he sat in the chair, his gaze fixed out the window, just as the veteran had done all those years. Outside, the townspeople paused as they passed. Some removed their hats, others pressed hands to their hearts. No words were exchanged, only the weight of respect that filled the street like morning mist. The chair was no longer a symbol of waiting. It had become a beacon, a reminder that honor, sacrifice, and memory must be carried forward, not just by one man, but by all who come after. And so the watch continued, not with silence of loss, but with silence of legacy.